It's about time I had authentic conversations about conversations I avoid. Acacia, Thorny Conversations.
The year is 1990. The world is witnessing something phenomenal because after 26 years in prison, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela is being released from prison. There's a sense in the air among the South Africans that a regime change is about to happen. And every person is anxious for this. But soon the anticipation changes because in the months that follow, the country is broiled into an intense struggle for power as the major political actors begin to position themselves. So much so are they entangled that they forget to realize there's one interesting collateral: the children. In order to capture their attention back to what was really happening, the musician, secular musician Chico, writes a song that I loved to listen to when I was a child. It was called Papa Stop the War. In the lyrics of the song, it says something interesting. It says she's looking down, lying on the ground. She doesn't want him to go to war. Scream and shout, no solution. Papa's never home when we need him. He's always going out to war. And then the chorus of the song keeps saying those same words: Papa, Papa, can't you stop this war? The whole graphic was about the idea of a child pleading with a father to stop the entire war. It seems the entire country was so transactional about the politics of the day that they had forgotten one important piece in all of this. They were abusing their children, they were neglecting them, and by so doing, they're jeopardizing their future. This is not just true about post-apartheid South Africa. It's true for many homes, it's true for many churches, it's true for many societies. The reality of child abuse forms our discussion today on Acacia. In case you're joining us for the first time, Acacia stands for Authentic Conversations About Conversations I Avoid. And in case you're wondering why I use conversation twice, it is because I need it emphasized. We need to have these conversations we avoid. And we avoid conversations in many ways. We either feign anger, or we discharge our frustrations on people who are weaker than us, or people who are below us. We avoid conversations in many ways, but you know what? No matter how much you avoid, and whichever way or approach you use to avoid a conversation, the issues still remain. The matters that still need to be addressed remain there. A father who beats up the children because he's drunk all the money and is now anxious about how he'll provide school fees will leave a crying child and go out and still come back to a crying child without school fees. The abuse has not solved it. It has helped him escape the issue for a while, but it has not made him run away from it completely. So it is with life. Many children nowadays are being abused, and the form and nature of abuse takes different shapes, in different forms, and we're quiet about it. What's powerful, or what helps also fuel this whole business of abuse, is on one end is ignorance, and on the other side is proximity. Let me be clear on what these two mean. Ignorance. Some children are abused and they do not know they are being abused, because abusers are people who come across as their friends, or people who give them nice things, or things that would be able to seduce the child along the way. Or at times their parents have just been absent and have not given them the sufficient knowledge to know their rights and things that should not happen. And so people in whom they are left to take care of them are then able to take full advantage of them, which is wrong. So ignorance on the side of the children, but there's also a second form of ignorance, which is on the part of the parents. In this rushing society, many parents are really ignorant about the nitty-gritties, the day-to-day happenings within their children. Many parents leave home way early in the morning before they can even see their children off to school, and come back way late in the evening when the children are either sleepy or asleep. And there's no time to be able to catch up and know about who and what transpired in the life of the child. And so it's perfectly possible for a parent in modern day life, in this hustle and bustle, to be perfectly ignorant about the fact that their child is either an abuser or sadly being abused. The second component is proximity. Most of the cases of abuse that do happen in society are by people who are close. By close, I mean either relation-wise or geographically. My wife and I took the decision that we will do something non-African with our home. And the non-African decision we took was we will not have to live with our relatives. Now, in many African societies, it is normal and at times even expected that you will take relatives. And relatives, I don't just mean your mother or your father. I mean, it could be a distant uncle, a distant cousin to be able to live with you. Often because the case is we are struggling, we have poverty, and you need to lift people up. But the reason my wife and I took the decision not to live with relatives is we had experienced certain forms of abuse. Fortunately, not physical, not sexual abuse, I mean, but there were certain forms of abuse we had seen in the families we grew up with, and also in just talking with other people who gone and grown up in circumstances similar to ours. We saw a lot of abuse happening, and it was perpetuated by people who are close, both geographically and also relationally. And we of course realized the simple way is just don't get started, don't get close. So the proximity component of child abuse is the person abusing your child is more likely not somebody way across the globe. It's most likely the people right with you, the domestic helper, the teacher at school, the playmate, the places that go for sleepovers, a relative living with you, and at times, tragically so, could even be one of the spouses is abusing. And I'm not just restricting this to sexual, could be verbal, could be physical, could be emotional. Later on in this series, we'll talk about pornography, but allow me to speak about something here. I have dealt with very many cases of young people struggling with pornography. And I could give it a guesstimate of 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. All of these people began this vice young, as children. Their parents did not know. And it was often an older relative who was himself or herself a slave or an addict to pornography who then introduced the unsuspecting child because they were living in proximity, and either the child looked up to this relative, began introducing them this way. And that, of course, in itself is a form of abuse. It's illegal in most jurisdictions that I know about, but also it just goes ahead to show that the person who is introducing your child to things that will abuse them, whether it's alcohol or people who will take advantage of them physically or otherwise, are people in the proximity. Granted, in this age of internet and social media and the world being a connected village, the number of people who could abuse your child has increased exponentially, because once they put themselves out there online, it's so only God knows where these particular abusers will come from. Could be somebody on the other side of the world, either cyberbullying your child or sending away child pornography to the direction of your child, or just continuously bombarding them in that space. And so child abuse is basically any action that harms the growth and the progression of a child. Any action that harms the growth, the development, and progression of a child. Let me say what it is not. Abuse is not discipline. It is expected that parents should be able to have boundaries. Parents should be able to create things that children can and cannot do. It is expected that teachers can be able to enforce naughty corners and penalties for children either failing to do their homework or arriving late or not doing the right thing. That is perfectly within the jurisdiction of parents and learning and all of that. So discipline, when properly executed, is not abuse. But even things that are legitimate, like discipline, can be carried into excess. Reminds me, I was having a very candid conversation with a former workmate of mine, and when we caught up about the very dramatic manners of discipline some of our African parents subjected us to, he made a very deep thought and very telling comment. He said, you know what, I think our parents were stressed. I think our parents were depressed. And many of the actions they took were out of depression. And then he continued to say this. Many of them were not aware that they themselves were depressed. And as one of my favorite all-time preachers, the late C.D. Brooks said, he said, God prepared a place where you could spank a child, and he even prepared flesh for it to be able to receive the cane. So don't go beating the child on the eye or on the back or on the teeth. Beat them where God has provided them. So he said that with a light touch, but I think what he was referring to was the need for even legitimate things like discipline being carried out in ways that are within limits. What does the world say? The world swings on two extremes. One extreme of the world on this issue of child abuse seems to give the child so much power, so much autonomy, that the child is considered as a complete free moral agent who needs no parental control, who needs no restrictions from straight, who should be able to do and engage in anything whichever way they want to be. That's one extreme. The other extreme of that insists on extreme control, extreme regulation. Now, both extremes have a problem because what we are training children to become is to become well, properly functioning adults. Childhood training is not meant to make successful childhood. Childhood training, the aim of properly, successfully raised children is that they become thriving, well-managed adults. And one of the key things that will make sure that that is the case is that we are raising up children who will grow up to be adults with resilience. Now, a lot of research having gone into this area reveals to us that resilience is built in individuals when they take on high challenging tasks with the adequate amount of support. High challenging tasks with the adequate amount of support. So the proper space is not thinking about children as free, complete, moral agents that can do what they feel like, they can be wherever they be. And that it's not the other end of stifling the child's personality or emasculating it out of existence. The proper place is somewhere in the middle, where children can be able to be given age-relevant, proportionate challenges that will help them grow while having the right amount of support, boundaries, and security. They need to be protected from abuse that either comes from siblings, parents, relatives, or any other person within the society. But again, as I've said, abuse is not synonymous with discipline. Abuse will take various forms. As I've said, it'll take physical, it'll take sexual, it'll take mental, and nowadays it takes even things like cyberbullying, threatening, kidnapping, and all manner of things. We're having a joke the other day with my siblings about how we used to manipulate each other, and we actually agreed that even we as children among ourselves were guilty of abusing each other and manipulating each other when you wanted one of your siblings to get things done your particular way or they needed to be bailed out. I think we did a lot of things there that were not necessarily Christian now looking back. But on a more serious note, what does the Bible have to say about child and about children and about the whole area of abuse? Christ has a bit powerful things to say. Not a bit, actually very powerful things to say. Let me begin with one of the statements he makes in the book of Matthew. In Matthew chapter 18, when you read verses 5 and 6, Christ is very clear. He says, he will not take it kindly for any person who makes one of these little children to stumble. Just pause with me. In the Christian teaching, we as Seventh-day Adventists believe that God has given the work of judging this world to Christ. And so Christ, while on the earth, this is the judge. He's speaking, he's saying, whoever will cause one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for them, rather than face me as the judge, it would be better if a milling stone was tied around their necks and they're thrown into the deep sea. In verses 9 and 10 of the same Matthew 18, he actually makes a very interesting revelation. He says, the little children, do not stifle them because they are angels gaze into my face. It seems, according to Christ, that there's a certain level of access that the angels responsible for the children seem to possess, that any person who therefore wants to venture into the domain of stifling or abusing children needs to really rethink it very deeply, because Christ takes it personally and does not take it kindly. In the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 4, parents being given guidance on how to raise their children are reminded, fathers, do not provoke your children. Do not provoke your children. And there are many ways of provoking. I often used to think about provoking children to be simply restricted to bullying and stuff like that. But the Bible in another corner says, and consider how to provoke or how to stir each other towards love and towards good works. So simply put, parents are being reminded, at least from the biblical stand, that there are two ways they could provoke their children. They could provoke their children for good, or they could provoke their children to go into things that are wrong. The power of the parents' example could either strengthen the children in the ways of good or could lead them into ways of wrong. But on the second side, parents need not convert themselves into bullies who then bring their children down, who tear their ego, who tear down their emotions, who tear down their personalities. Parents need not recreate their children into miniature versions of themselves. But parents need to be supportive. They need to offer guidance. They need to be able to leverage on their wisdom and be able to guide the children in the way that the Lord would have them grow. Why? Because according to the book of Psalms, it is very clear that children are actually an inheritance from the Lord. The Bible recognizes children not as objects to be traded in, not as medals to be flaunted around, but the Bible does recognize children as a reward, as a gift from the Lord, almost to suggest that the same exact manner would treat with care, would treat with pride, would treat with concern, would treat with wisdom any gift, any prize we got either from our labors or our giftings. We should be able to do the same with our children. The same way you will not throw your gifts to any person who comes around, it's the same way you should not just throw your children to any form of abuse or neglect them. So that we should not be responsible for aiding abuse by omission or by commission. So the Bible is very clear about the place of the child. Now, just a little anecdote. My father, when I was born, was not going to church. My grandmother, his father, was a very astute, very deeply rooted person in the church. She introduced my mother to the church. So it's actually my mother who took us to church growing up. My father did come to faith, and he did come to Christ when I was somewhere in my grade 6 of schooling. But of the many things that Dad, who was not going to church, who was not reading the Bible, one of the verses, or the series of verses he knew, were the verses in the Bible that regard about caning. And so what would happen is, once you got yourself into trouble and you needed to be caned, what Dad would do, this is a non-church going father, he'd make you sit and give you the Bible, and then make you read all the verses that speak about sparing the rod, spoiling the child, and foolishness. The verse in Proverbs that speaks about foolishness is in the heart of a child, and the rod will be able to sort it out. And whereas the Bible speaks about the need, and you could justify from the Bible the need to spank a child, what the Bible does not talk about is intensity or the number of canes. So what Dad would do is, he would, after he's done making you read the Bible, he would now play the victim and say, like, you see, it's not me, it's a Bible. But then after that, the interpretation of intensity and the number of canes was a matter that he did not consult the Bible. I wish the Bible had put a limit in there. This, from my experience, looking back, I appreciate the fact that I was spanked. I will not speak against it, because when we sit with my siblings, we all agree that all of us had the potential of becoming very wayward, and there was need for some form of corporal punishment had its place. What we also all agree is that the extent to which it was often carried out was in the boundaries of excess. Granted, we also did quite some excessively mischievous things, but that's a story for another day. But the point I want to bring across is this. The parents, one of our duties is, yes, we need to be able to leverage on the Bible as a tool for discipline. And yes, the Bible does provide for the need or the necessity for parents to be able to carry out things like spanking. However, we should not carry this to a form that will make either the children hate the Bible, because then it looks like an aid to parental brutality, or will not be carried to an extent where now our children begin fearing us, because when we begin getting into those territories, we probably are within the realms of abuse. How do we practically navigate these waters of child abuse? Number one, speak up. Whether you're the victim or you're the person who knows a victim, you need to speak up. What needs to happen, what the environment within which a lot of the abuse tends to happen is an environment of silence. Some of the children being abused are silent because the people who are abusing them come across as their friends, or at times because they really like them and they do not want to see them being punished, or they fear what will happen should these people be taken away. So in cases, for instance, where a father was reported about sodomizing or molesting his children, the children kept quiet because they liked their father and they feared what would happen to their father should he be taken away. The mother came to know about this, and fortunately the mother was able to speak up, and a way of remedying this thing was done. So if you are the victim, or if you know the victim, you need to be able to speak up. Now we need wisdom in how to speak up on these things. If you're a teacher, if you're a pastor, if you're a person who by law is required to report these things, you please need to do so. The world has been treated to very many cases where priests and teachers and sports instructors who knew better, who ought to have done better, have been found guilty of either aiding or abating some of this abuse for just not wanting or not speaking up to the authorities in time. So please speak up, because your silence is probably what is going to rob some child of their innocence, is going to rob the child of their future and of their potential. So step number one is speak up. Step number two is vigilance. Let me speak about vigilance at all levels. I think the first level of vigilance is parents. Children were given to you before they were given to your teachers, before they were given to your pastors, they were given to you. So the first level of vigilance should be with parents. I think every single day a parent should carve out some time to engage with the child. That way you're able to pick up any changes in behavior, any changes in mood, any thoughts, any things that were happening. Remember, at the beginning we spoke about ignorance. So your child might be being touched in ways that are inappropriate and they don't know. But if you're just a friend with them and you get to talk with them, they easily will speak about these things, at times just with the same ignorance and with the same innocence. And you're able to seize that moment to teach them that it is wrong for people to touch you that way. Or you're able to take more advanced steps if this is something that needs such escalation. But you miss out 100% if you're not engaged in the life of your children, if you're not vigilant. Also, therefore, be vigilant where your children go. I know families that have categorically refused for their children to have sleepovers until they are fully adults. The reason being, I trust my friend, you trust your friend, but you don't know their children, you don't know the other relative who lives with them, and therefore sending your children over to your friend's place, though you trust them and the nature of relationship you have with your friend may not be the same nature of relationship they have with their children, or they have with their relatives, or they have with the caregivers within their home. So be vigilant. Where do your children go? Where are they spending time? How are they hanging out? What are the changes that are happening within their lives? Has your child who's been very loud and outgoing and everything suddenly reclined? How does he react when certain people observe? Does he look threatened? Is he happy? If your child is becoming reluctant to go to school in the morning, before you declare that, hey, this child does not like schooling, probably you need to sit them and ask them what is happening in school. Maybe another student or maybe a teacher, God forbid, is responsible for some form of abuse within their life. And those are things that can only be captured through being vigilant. And number three is we need to press together as a society. We need to be able to support each other. We need to be able to hold each other more accountable. Parenting in this age is difficult. It was already difficult when the problems we had was chewing gums and kicking the ball into the neighbor's compound. But now we are grappling with challenges of an international scale because of the internet. And parents and the community that supports them needs to become more intentional, needs to become more deliberate. I work for an IT company, and I was having a chat with one of the developers who works with us and asking her what she's building. And I was very impressed that what they are building for one of the companies they work for is they're building software that helps them be able to monitor where a child is watching and be able to control and modulate that. In an age of internet time, I think those are the kind of communities that people need to begin building together. How can we even leverage technology to be able to do that? But way before we even do it at a technology-enabled level, we need to be able to come and be able to do it by knowing my neighbor, knowing their values, knowing their children. Because remember, the abuse is more likely to happen in proximity. Be involved in your school, in your children's school. Be involved in your children's church, because those, by you transferring values, by you strengthening those communities, in return, those very same communities will strengthen you. Finally, if you know a child who's been abused, or if you're the child who's been abused, do not live with the scars. You need to seek professional help. Many people have bottled it in, and it shows up at the wrongest place, in the most unexpected time, and in the most unexpected manners. I know of families that are struggling in marriage because the girl, for instance, was molested when young, and now the whole act of marriage is an abhorrence to them. If these people had sought professional help way earlier, they'd been able to navigate some of these things. So we need to understand that the person abused is a victim. The person abused is not the victim. It should not be, the person abused is the victim and should not be treated as the culprit. They need to be given all the support they need. They need to seek professional help for this. And don't try rationalize their pain. Don't try wish it away. Don't try even spiritualizing it away. Please get the help of a spiritual, godly counselor. And they can be able to help you recover your state and your purity as it is in Christ. So child abuse is real. And again, just remember the words that I began with, the words from Chico. He said, "Papa, Papa, can't you stop this war?" Our children are being abused, and I think every cry from every other next child that is being abused is almost similar to that. "Papa, Papa, can't we stop this war?" And if we become vigilant, if we become involved, if we educate our children, if we remember their prize and their gifts, we can be able to roll back the scourge of abuse. Until next time, my name is Sir Jackson, and this is an authentic conversation about conversations I avoid. God bless you.